Yeah, hello all. Yeah. So today we are going to discuss about the repository annotation, and we will see how we can use this repository annotation in a Spring Boot application. So basically a repository annotation is used to indicate that a class is a repository. And in a Spring we know that we have several layers like controller layer, service layer, and a repository layer. So to mark any Java class as a controller layer, we mark with @controller annotation. To mark any Java class with a service layer, we use @service annotation. In a similar manner, to mark any Java class as a repository, we mark @repository annotation to that class, and basically it is a class level annotation. So @repository is means like which is a type of a Spring Bean and responsible for encapsulating the interaction with the data source or a database. So basically the repository layer will interact with the database, and then it will fetch the data from the database. So like repository in Springs are like typically used to do the CRUD operation like create, read, update, and delete operations on the entities. So when you annotate a class with @repository, it informs the Spring framework to enable the feature such as exceptional translation for database specific exceptions into a data access exception. So yeah, so like when you are interacting with the database, then there may be chance that you will get n number of exceptions, right? So if you are marking any class with the repository, and then with that class is interacting with the database, then we are telling the Spring to handle that exception and to translate that exception into a Spring data access exception so that developer can like handle it, right? So like it is important to note that while @repository is often used with a class that interact with database, so like it is not limited to just database related operation. It can also be used more broadly on other type of data access, such as accessing the external system or services. It means that it is not just that we can access database through the repository layer. We can also means use this repository for accessing the external resources or the systems or like services, right? So this is all about the @repository. So next we will see the purpose of using @repository. So basically there are like a few purposes which we can achieve by using @repository annotation. So first is like exception translation. So with @repository, Spring will catch database related exceptions and read through them as a Spring data access exception. This can simplify exception handling in your code, right? So with the @repository, the Spring will automatically translate all the exceptions and it will read through with data access exception so that it can be handled easily in your code. So the second purpose is like bean definition. So @repository also signals to a Spring component scanning mechanism that this class should be considered when looking for a bean to be managed by a Spring container, right? So we know that when we use the stereotype annotation, then those uh, like are handled by the Spring container. So if you're marking any class with a repository, then we are telling Spring to handle that class, right? So it is essentially a specialization for the component annotation with additional functionality to the data access. So we know that the stereotype annotation is @component, and @repository is the specification for @component annotation, right? And it provide extra functionality above @component annotation, that is the data access, right? So with the component, it will not provide any data access, or it will not translate all the exceptions to the data access exception, but these @repository will do for us. So the third purpose can be like consistent naming convention. So the @repository annotation provide a semantic hint about the purpose of the annotation. follows the principle of consistent naming the convention in a Spring, making it easier for the developer to understand the role of the particular class in an application, right? So in a Spring project, we divide into the layers, different layer. So like there is a repository layer which is connecting with the database. So with this at the repository, it will means divide, or the developer will understand that okay, so like this is a repository layer, and we can write the particular code for interacting with the external resources or the database, right? So this is providing the naming convention, and it will make the developer know for this, that this is for a particular like reason, right? The fourth purpose can be like interaction with the Spring data. So if you are using a Spring data JPA or the other Spring modules, the repository annotation is often used with the classes that extend repository interfaces provided by Spring data, right? So Spring data provide a set of convenient features for working with data access, and at the rate repository annotation is a part of the integration. So with the repository like yeah, so like with the repository annotation, you can mark any interface, and then you can extend any like JPA like module to interact with the data, right? So interact with the database and all. Yeah, so this is the integration annotation for using the data JPA also. So so the conclusion, we can say that while it is not strictly necessary to use at the repository for every classes that interact with the database, but it can provide a benefit in terms of code organization, exception handling, and like integration with other Spring features, like, right? Yeah, so these are the some like purposes of a repository. So now next we are going to see how we can integrate at the repository in our Spring Boot project, right? So already we have a controller, employee controller, which has one endpoint, right? Which is returning yep, and from this endpoint we are calling our service class. So basically we have also one employee service which has a method which is returning the dummy string, right? So from this service layer we are going to call the repository class, and the repository class can contain the code for interacting with the database, right? So let me create one mm, like the package for repository, and in this repository package I will like to create uh, one, so like one employee repository. Okay, so this can be like interface, and yeah, so to make this as a repository, so what you can do, you can simply, or either you can make this class also. So you can simply, so let me go with this class here, because we will not extend any JPA, right? We will simply, I will show you how to uh, means call this. So let me create one repository class to make you understand how it works. So employee repository. So yeah, so this is a simple Java class. So let me use a repository annotation as a class label, and this repository annotation is coming from a stereotype, right? So this is one like repository layer. So basically in a real like project, we write a logic to interact with the database, right? So if you are using any like a Spring data JPA or any other services, then basically we create a interface, and then we extend with a JPA repository, and then what will happen, all the JPA repository methods like save, find all will get yeah, so we'll get like overridden here, But now I will not use any JPA because I don't have created a database. Yeah, so this is just for making you understand about the repository annotation. So that's why I will use this class, and then simply I will create one like a public getter method which will return uh, yeah, so this will return a dummy string. So basically in real project we write to get the value from the database, right? But here I will return simply a dummy string, uh, data from repository layer, right? So this is the dummy string we are going to return. Cool. So okay, so this repository method we are going to call from service layer. So this is our employee service. So we need to inject this repository inside employee service. So we will use field injection, right? So let me create the reference variable for this employee repository. So for like dependency injection, I will use AutoWire. So I will mark this field with @AutoWire. So what it will do, it will so container will now handle this. Okay, so container will keep the object, and here earlier in our get employee method of the service class we will returning a dummy strings, but now I will call the get employee method of our repository class. So with this like reference variable, let's call get employee, right? So yeah, so now we have completed our code. So basically what is will be the flow when we will hit through a postman to this endpoint. First it will go to this service layer because we are using employee service dot get employee, and this get employee is again calling a repository layer, right? And in this repository layer we are calling get employee method which will return data from repository layer, right? So if we will test it, then we should get this data from repository layer. So let me start this project, and then from postman we will test it, and by calling that endpoint, and then we will see what things will be display. So you can say that when we start this application, it started in 8080. Okay, so let me go to the postman. Yeah, okay. So I have opened Postman, and in the Postman, we have to provide that endpoint, and this is the getter method. So let me send a hit to a send button. So you will see that we are getting a response as data from repository layer, right? So it means we are getting the data from the repository layer, right? Yeah, so this is the use for the repository annotation, and in this I have explained you about the repository. But in the real world project we are going to call to a JPA. If we are using Spring Data JPA, then we will make this as an interface, and then we will extend with the JPA repository, and then all those methods like save, find all, find by ID. So we can use those method to call directly the database to find a particular employee by the ID, right? Or we can get all the employee data, and then we can return this from here, right? But here I have just explained you about the repository annotation, how we use it and for what purpose, right? Yeah, so like I hope you understand this. So yeah, so like in the next lecture we will understand @bean and how to use @bean annotation. So thank you and have a nice day.